Good morning. Would you please stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance? Pretty quick. Trying to make up time. All right. First thing on the agenda is public input. And we've got a few slips of paper here. And first one would be Dr. Tibbetts.
Good morning, board members, superintendent. I want to tell you, first of all, that I emailed the superintendent over the weekend saying that it was really hard to comment on your agenda today since there was really no information at all whatsoever available on the website other than this. These weren't even here. That being aside, one last word on your Sandlin decision. Your decision to terminate her was right. Your attorney led you down a path when he said, before you made your final order, well, go ahead, even though the hearing officer didn't agree with getting rid of her, it's okay that you do it. 2 weeks later, he comes back and said, oh, you maybe shouldn't have done that because now she's taken it to the district court and they might be inclined to listen to that hearing officer. Wow, great advice. When you make a decision, be ready to face the consequences. You should have said, kiss my, and go ahead, or not done it in the first place, because now you've said to every employee of yours, no matter what they do, they threaten to take you to court, you're going to back off. They aren't going to let you fire them. It's happened. It's done. We talked last week of things that are on the record. That's what's on the record. Understand that. Put your superintendent in a very difficult position, but it puts you in a worse position, because what are you going to do the next time? Oh, will they maybe try to sue me or not? If you think you're right, you're right. Remember that that's what we elected you for. We want you to do what you think is right, not what you're scared into doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Ms. Cronin.
Good morning, board members, superintendent. Again, I'm just addressing you with compensation issues for your employees. I know we've added a lot of new positions this year. Were they all necessary? Could we afford them all? You look at the budget, there seems to be departments that have furniture, fixtures, and equipment. I'd like you to look these departments over, see what they're spending this money on. Some even have improvement plans to their department. We need to see what's going on. We need to look at these budgets, whether we cut the budgets by 2%, whatever we do we need everything that's on that budget? Employees need a pay increase, some type of pay increase. Other counties are refusing their pay increases. We don't even have one on the table. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Susan Morgan.
As a retired teacher of 38 years, you would think I'd be used to talking, but I'm a little nervous up here. It's like, whoa, all my teachers are looking at me. Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
My understanding is that the superintendent's performance is connected yearly to her chance of receiving a bonus. My question is, in light of the fact that I hear all these declarations that there is no money to provide your teachers and your staff with any kind of raises, does the superintendent have the right to refuse this bonus as a good faith gesture? That would be my question to you.
Just a point of clarification, Ms. Morgan. Actually, it's not a bonus, it's a continuation of her contract that was negotiated. It's not considered a bonus.
Is it then legally, would she have a right to like amend that contract for like a year and say, you know, this year I'm looking at my contract and I understand that that's there, but
That's a decision that she would make, not we as the board. Mr. Klatt.
First off, happy Rosh Hashanah. I'm Stuart Klatt, LCEA, and I represent 3,000 other contracted employees with Lake County. And for at least 10 years, every time we bring an issue to the school board, whether it be testing, whether it be the 736 annual contracts, this, that, and the other thing, we're always said it's the legislature's fault. That's where we have to go to fix it. So you as elected school board members, we're kind of elected to what can you do for local control and not abdicate your responsibilities to the state. The State Department of Education in a lawsuit from Fund Education Now emphatically defended itself, saying it's all school board issue. Don't blame us, it's up to the school board how they spend our monies. Unfortunately, I mean, the accolades to teachers are wonderful, are nice, we appreciate them, but they don't pay the electric bill. They don't put food on the table. It seems like, and pardon the cartoon quote, teachers are getting the, we will gladly repay you Tuesday for a hamburger today. So we do have some issues. But you all were elected to be able to, what can you do locally? What can you do to set priorities locally and not rely totally on the state legislature? FEA and teacher unions around the state are pushing a $2.4 billion investment in education for next year. We are advocating a decade of progress to move Florida from the bottom of the funding bucket nationally to the top 10. We have been working with the governor's office. We've been working with the legislators, House and Senate leaders, as to what we can do to improve teacher pay. Teachers have been doing their side of the job. So thank you very much for your time and attention. And remember, you were elected to make some of the hard decisions, to set the priorities locally. And our local population is trusting you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to 3.01, Gray Robinson Legislative Priorities Discussion.
Just want to welcome our team from Gray Robinson here with Robert Stewart, and Angie's here this morning, and Chris Dawson. And if y'all want to just come up where we can have you in front of the microphones. The reason why and I explained to Mr. Tibbetts why there isn't anything on the agenda today, is that today is really a conversation, and so there was not any backup to place on there in regards to this item. because this is your time to talk to our lobbyist about those priorities that Mr. Glatt just mentioned. We know that funding is something that we keep hearing about in the headlines right now from the governor and the commissioner and their priorities. And so a little bit of our opportunity to talk to you about your insight into what you're hearing. Thank you for what you've done in the past session. We know that we've still got some work to do on the compression adjustment. I know we'll talk about that today, but y'all were very instrumental in securing us additional funding for Eustis High School. We're grateful for that. And so we're going to let you just kind of give some highlights of the past session, and then I think our job is just to have a conversation about what we want you to do for us in the coming session.
Perfect. And I'm Robert Stewart. Thank you so much for having us today. With me is Chris Dawson and Angie Langley. We are part of your team that carries your message to Tallahassee each year for the legislative session, and then, of course, during all of the interim months when the legislature is not in session, we are continuing to have interactions with decision makers on your behalf to advance your interests. A quick overview, and I won't get too into the weeds because I want to leave plenty of time to have a conversation, but quick overview of what happened this past session, some highlights. Of course, Elevate Lake at Eustis High School, we were able to secure $500,000 to get that program up and running. Similar to what we were able to accomplish the year before with Leesburg High School. That's a nice track record of success, and we've been honored to be a part of that. And the lion's share of the credit goes to your delegation, which has really rallied around those priorities as things that they wanted to see happen in their county and have helped us push for that funding. The compression adjustment was funded again this year at $54 million statewide. That ended up being about 2.3 for Lake County for the 2019-2020 fiscal year. During the midst of that negotiation about whether or not to fund the compression allocation, when the session started, the Senate not only wanted to fund it, but wanted to make it permanent, recurring funding, which was our suggestion going into the session as well, and what we supported. The House didn't have it funded, and ultimately where they met was one-year funding, and that's sort of the carrot for fixing the funding formula, and then the stick for fixing the funding formula that came along with it was a study of the DCD. And that study is ongoing now. In fact, I made a couple of calls last week to try to find out the status of that. It's still very much in process. There'll be presentations given in the weeks ahead of what that might look like. But what the House and Senate sort of, I guess, informally agreed to in the midst of the budget negotiations was fund it again, make sure the districts who are falling below the statewide average aren't unnecessarily hurt again, and then let's take a longer look at what that funding formula ought to look like going forward so that maybe things like compression aren't needed anymore, that people are properly funded. And so we're going to keep a very close eye on that once that study comes out and those results begin to be discussed. The BSA was increased last year by $75. $248 was the overall increase in per student allocation. Of that, $75 is that flexible BSA. Compare that to a 47-cent increase the year before. I think we would all agree it's still not enough, but it's a step in the right direction from where the legislature was the year before. A fun issue that we got to work on your behalf, which was more policy-based, your transportation staff brought an idea to Ms. Cornegie that she then brought to us to modify the language and statute to allow you to move students between campuses of your high schools for workforce development without using a traditional school bus. So long story short, the law requires that you can only transport students in a big yellow bus. I'm overly simplifying it, but you get it. What this now allows you to do is if a student is moving or is going from one high school to another for a workforce training program that isn't offered at their home school, you can transport that student to and from using a smaller, more efficient vehicle for those types of trips. So something that Chris and I worked on very closely and got it put into one of the broader education packages, which was the workforce education bill. And I want Chris to talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what ended up being an omnibus workforce education bill. And I think credit to your county. You've been on the leading edge of workforce training and development as a career path and an educational model before the state really has finally gotten on board with it. So with what you're doing at Eustis, with what you're doing at Leesburg and other places, you were sort of on the cutting edge of this. Now the legislature has come alongside with a widely supported, bipartisan workforce training and educational bill that has a lot of nuances in it for school districts. You want to touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And the bill Robert's referencing was House Bill 7071, and it was an omnibus bill related to adult education, career technical education, and workforce development. It was probably the largest package of its type, certainly in over a decade in the legislature, and so there was a lot of pride, I think, as the legislature and governor particularly have taken a renewed interest in workforce development, career technical education. The bill did a myriad of things. Some of the highlights that I'll include, first, it established a Sail to 60 initiative, and what that is a target for the state that by the year 2030, over 60% of our citizens will have a high-value, career-based degree, whether that's a college degree, whether it's some type of workforce certificate, but really a focus on making sure that the education that's being provided in the state is targeted to industries and careers and jobs that are available that are high-wage, high, growth potential industries. It also established a college and career decision day. So, we all obviously is focused a lot on students going to universities and colleges. This is an initiative that's designed to help highlight some of the career and technical education possibilities that are out there as well. So students who are electing not to go to a university, but to go to a apprenticeship or pre-apprenticeship program that recognizes the value of that curriculum path that they're taking. A very interesting component that I think will shape the conversation for years to come is there was a component of the bill that helps DOE capture greater detail on what type of workforce development and apprenticeship programs we're offering currently, what the job placement on those programs is. So we're now going to track how many students are taking each type of career and technical education program, whether it's electrical or plumbing or mechanical, HVAC, any of those. We'll track the number of students. We'll track how much the state is spending on that type of career workforce training. We'll track how many of those students are employed, what the employment numbers are, and what that's targeted at is really helping the state figure out where the best bang for the buck is in workforce development. And so in years to come, when we have that data available to us, both at the local level and at the state level, it will allow greater flexibility in moving dollars to where the need truly is in the industry. And again, that's tied directly to helping students achieve outcomes that give them a better job, better pay, better growth potential. The bill did a couple of other individual tweaks related to things like, how algebra is graded as far as full-time course credits and some other things, but those are really the highlights of what 7071 was intended to do. We also know that the legislature will be working this session and certainly in sessions to come to implement some of the changes that were made in 7071. So, for instance, currently there's an effort going on right now to revamp some of the career and workforce boards that exist across the state, really a focus to streamline some of those boards, bring more industry professionals onto those boards, and we've already been in communication with some of the legislators who are working on bringing that change to fruition this coming legislative session. So with that, I'll pass it back over.
Thank you. That was a good overview. The last thing I'll mention, and then I'd love to open it up to questions and discussion. Best and brightest is obviously a topic that was a big one for y'all last year. There were changes made to best and brightest to remove that SAT, ACT component, which was, I think, controversial would be an understatement for granting the awards based upon that, and going to more of a traditional teacher evaluation model with principal interaction and how the students are performing in the classroom. That was a change made this past year, but Best and Brightest was still funded and at $260 plus or minus $1 million statewide. The governor actually just this past week expressed a desire, although the full details of the plan are not yet rolled out, of a across-the-board pay increase for teachers statewide, and hinted at using the Best and Brightest money to do exactly that, stating on the record that at a question and answer session after a press conference that he had, that it doesn't need to be as complicated as it is. I'm paraphrasing, but he thought there was an easier way to pay teachers more than this. And so be on the lookout for that. It would be interesting to see this governor and this commissioner of education look at using Best and Brightest for a across-the-board teacher raise when it was this Commissioner of Education's original idea when he was in the House. But if there's one constant in Florida, it's change in politics. And so we'll be keeping a close eye on that and keeping you and your team up to speed as that begins to get rolled out. And with that, I'll kind of I'll hand it back over with the final caveat of committee weeks are underway. They started last month. Started this month, a couple weeks ago. There are two committee weeks in October, 2 in November, 1 in December, and then we are back at it for the start of session in mid-January, moving through mid-May. So the first committee week was very much pomp and circumstance. It was the designation of the new speaker designate. It was a couple of reports from committees. No bills were heard. No legislation began to move. I guess a couple of bipartisan bills in the Senate began to move, but not in the House. Things that are not related to education. But of course, there's going to be a lot happening this month and next. And so the time is right to be having this conversation, begin to outline your priorities, and we'll begin to work on those on your behalf. So with that, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the confidence you placed in our team and in our firm, and excited to have this conversation with you today.
All right. Board, do you have any comments or statements you'd like? Open it up to you now.
Okay, so obviously the driver for me is the compression formula. And so I've updated this form which I'm going to give you. And this is our second calculation of our funding. We are tied pretty much for we're 61, so there's only a few cents from 60 and a few pennies from 62nd. So the three counties that are grouped within that. The DCD, for 4 years, I was focused on that because I thought it was low-hanging fruit. There were 14 counties that benefited from it, the balance did not. It was shared by another lobbyist in Tallahassee that there was no way I would ever get traction on that, and it's been in study for 2 years now. So that says a lot for his insight at those big boys. So without taking anything away from these larger districts, and there's 25 over the state average, the balance of our counties fall below that. And all we want is equity that was promised by the legislation in 1973, and it's Florida Statute 1011.62. Now, we have been going with our hat in our hand trying to get adequate funding. It is law. So I don't understand why the compression is even being discussed. We're going to give it to you one time or another. It should be always there that there was going to be an equal education for all of our kids. And that when you see that in that compression, that we're 60 or 61 or 62, is that equity when we're 19th in student population. If we had equity, which is $7,800 per child, that would be an additional $20 million to this district. And I am over, like us being, we've tried it now for 2 years, and we were fortunate that we got a partial compression of $2 million, and it was woo-hoo. At that time, it was like $12 million. The spread is widening. Then we get another $2 million this year. Equity is $20 million, and that's where we need to be driving it. Now to Mr. Klatt, who spoke, where the FEA is looking for $2.4 billion. 2.4 billion. Maybe a start with that pressure at that end. $659 million appropriated to education would bring equity, the average of all counties. And it would affect 42 counties would benefit. So this kind of tells a story, so I'm going to give it to you.
I'd love to have it.
And also, there are counties that have gone out for millage increases, and that I've listed those, and those that still fall below, which is Lake County, we did a 0.75 for safety and security, and it still puts us short. Go forth and carry my scroll.
Roll it out in each of my meetings.
See how y'all look when you went, oh, shit.
Thank you.
All right,
Okay, I have another one.
go ahead.
Okay, so Senate Bill 360, sponsored by Diaz, which is bringing this minimum salary. It is fraught with unintended consequences. Like if you raise teacher salaries to 50,000, which I think is the scuttlebutt, then it's left to the district, because you can't have new teacher hires at 50 and have existing teachers at 40. So to bring those numbers up, we don't have the millions of dollars to do that, and yet it's put on the districts. And when we speak about our overall, all of our employees, it is put on the back of our service workers, because there's no funding that's been allocated for that at all. Zero. So that is a terrible bill, and it may sound bad for a school board member to say we don't have teachers at 50. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the unintended consequences of that would bankrupt us. And that's all I have for now.
Ms. Lou?
Are we going in order? Okay, I guess a couple,
I figured it'd be better than jumping in.
okay, that's fine. A couple of things that I wanted to mention were, in regards to you talked about the transportation put into a broader ed package, that the student could be transported if it was related to workforce education. I was wondering if it couldn't be, and this is a really premature discussion, but why couldn't we transfer students in those types of more economical vehicles, even if it was for a course that wasn't offered at one high school to another? So one thing that we're struggling with is how to keep our courses that are more advanced, that have limited number of students in them, how are we continuing to offer those courses and to supplement that educational side of the house? Where if it was offered at a local high school and not at another, could we not transport those students to the other high school as well? So does it have to be related to workforce education? I don't know if there's a limited.
The way the language is written, the answer is yes, it does have to be
Right.
related to that. There's 5, so in the, where we found this language, or where we ended up placing it, there are 5 exceptions for when you can, I guess there was 4 exceptions of when you can transport them in an alternative vehicle. We added a 5th for this reason. I don't see any reason why we couldn't go back to the same
Right.
legislators who helped us with this and say, hey, there really ought to be a 6th.
Yeah,
So we'd be happy to mess around with language with you on that and see what we can find.
that'd be great. I just was thinking while you were talking, there was something else that was huge that was in my mind, and then I was listening to you talk about the Senate bill that I hadn't heard of with Diaz, and I lost it. That's why I was like, oh, I'm next. And it'll come back to me because it was important and it was a big one, and I can't remember what it was now.
And mine came back, so we finished.
See what I mean? So I don't know if it'd be better to jump in, because I was like, I gotta make sure I say that, but I didn't put it right here, and now it's right in front of me, and it was something to do with, something that you guys sent out. I'm not gonna waste your time. Let me just think about it for just a second, and then I'll come back to it. I have a couple
We
more.
can
but
come
let me
back.
get
Got all
come
morning.
We can come back, that's no
You
problem.
get one turn.
No.
Mine.
No.
Until I forget something, then we'll do a second
That's right.
round. So to echo the funding piece, that is for me number one. That's huge. Not only when we talk about the disadvantage that we are in as Lake County, but we think about the repercussions that has on all of our people that we are asking to step up and to be part of some monumental educational shifts in this county, and then they deliver them. They deliver the great results, and we say, oh, I'm sorry, we've got nothing for you. Unless you happen to be at one of these 19 qualifying schools in our district from the best and brightest, which is bizarre because we have A schools off that list. Meanwhile, there are schools that have dropped a letter grade on that list. And you're a great teacher, and whether you're in the D school or whether you're in the C school, the B school, it doesn't matter, and you've delivered great results. You're highly effective, and then, sorry, because your whole school didn't achieve it, you don't get it, that's crazy. Okay, so that was my beef with the best and bright. Not to mention their little shell game they played this year with, oh, we're going to move the money into the FEFP and brag about an educational budget increase. Look at Lake County, look at how much more money you got, and people are seeing that. But then we say, oh, I'm sorry, we can't spend that money on teacher salaries, only for teacher bonuses, and then hold out hope, and maybe you'll be one of those teachers, and then the list comes out, and, oh, sorry, you're not one of those teachers. That's tough. All right, so thinking about that restricted versus unrestricted funding piece, that's significant, because if they give us all these dollars, but we can only spend them a certain way, that does us no good. It doesn't fix the problem. So then, in the days following, then I had a little bit of brief optimism from the governor's proposal or plan or whatever he's shouting about here to increase instructional salaries. But then the other part of me started to contemplate that. I said, now wait a second here. When he says raising teacher salaries, is he talking about all instructional staff or is he talking about teachers? Because the way Best and Brightest is written, we have so many instructional staff members who are excluded from the plan. If you are not a classroom teacher, you're left out. We have schools with curriculum resource teachers, not load-bearing. We've got literacy coaches, media specialists, all the district programming staff who are going into schools and trying to help teachers grow in their professional development. I mean, these are instructional level people, and they're all left out. We got nothing for them. We got, experts in their content fields, and we're saying, sorry, because you're not load-bearing, you don't have a classroom, you get nothing. So when the governor moves forward with this plan, he's got to be talking all instructional staff, not just load-bearing classroom teachers. The other part that had me a little nervous is it seemed to almost be like in the same paragraph as part of his expansion of school choice and private school vouchers. So I'm not sure how this is related. Maybe you only get the money if you're teaching in a private school, or there's an incentive for public school teachers to go elsewhere. I'm not sure. I don't know what this looks like, but it's all in the same articles that were published in the paper everywhere, that like in the same breath he's saying part of the school choice expansion. So I guess when I go back to that school choice expansion, I say, okay, well, school choice is all fine and dandy, but it can't come at our expense. So thinking about the funding piece, charters are killing us. They're absolutely killing us. And not because they're doing anything better, but people are picking the charters just because sometimes it's got charter in the name. All right? And so the new school opened down south. It's got, 268 students on the first day. 268 students potentially may have left our schools, but 268 kids worth of expenses didn't leave our schools, right? Because we still, let's say every one of those kids, let's say they were, okay, so nice round number. We got, about 42,000 kids in the district, and let's say that's basically what a program specialist makes. So every kid in the district is paying $1 towards that program specialist salary. Well, now these 268 kids left, but we still have to hire the program specialist. We still have a superintendent. We still have a principal in that school. We still have an assistant. We still have to have a growth planning department. We still have to have all these district departments, even though 268 kids left. But so the expenses don't necessarily leave. So that's where we've got to. I don't know how we whittle away at that. But some of these schools, they're taking in more than their share, right? When the funding level almost can't be equal because they don't have the burden of operating an entire school district like we do. And then when they open their school and don't provide buses, meanwhile we are providing buses, and we're only receiving back 50% of the expenses from our the actual transportation costs. The rest is coming out of general fund. They get to just plug all those dollars into the classroom and say, look what we've got. We've got all these extra programs that the public school doesn't offer down the street. We've got, all these other, all these extra support hands, teachers' assistants in every classroom, or whatever it is, you name it. That's a disadvantage for us. So if they're going to move forward with this expansion of school choice, it can't come at our expense. And that's where I'm struggling here. The other piece of that I was, once again, nervous about with the governor's proposal is, what about the other employees? Okay, even if he's got all the instructional covered, aside from just classroom teachers, how about our classified workers? How about the people who are professional and managerial, administrative? I mean, everybody wants an incentive to be in a destination district, right? So we've got to look at that all across the board. When we're thinking back about this DCD, one thing that drives me crazy is that, okay, Orange County, for example, is one of the beneficiaries of this. Their cost of living is higher in Orange County, but wait a second here. But you can live in Lake and go teach in Orange. That formula messes up when we're talking about Central Florida, where there's so many counties close to each other, that it's not a true comparison to say we need to give Orange County more money because their cost of living is higher than Lake County. No, I'll go teach in Orange County and live in Lake. Right? It doesn't work the balance that way. And the other piece of that is, maybe that was all the pieces of that funding piece. I've got a whole other topic when we jump off of funding, and that's third grade retention. I don't know if we're ready to jump off funding or if we want to continue with funding some more, or talk about a new topic. What
Let's
do you
stay
want
with
to?
funding first.
All right, let's talk about funding, and then we can come back to me because I got another one.
Because I'm sure Ms. Luke is.
I remembered. It just took me a minute. Like I said, you guys put me on the spot, so it was like, oh.
Right. I don't want to forget about third grade either. I mean, I agree with everything they say about funding. I don't think that there is any intention of putting any stop to the school choice efforts in the future. I think that's a train that there's no stopping. But I do think we need to argue for equity, that if they're going to give all these benefits, that we need to be able to be competitive. If they want to actually create a competitive environment, they need to unchain our hands so that we can actually have full control of our budget, the way that charters have full control of their budget. And we need to be able to compete with them on an even basis. If charters can choose not to educate, like charters shouldn't be able to choose not to educate ESE students, like special ed students. They shouldn't be able to choose not to transport students unless we're gonna decide that we don't transport students, which I don't think would be a good option for Florida. But I do think we are definitely put on an uneven footing, and we can't compete because of all of the regulations. Now, drilling down to which specific ones affect us most, transportation's a big deal. That's a huge funding. I mean, he's right. Like, people don't move in discrete packages, and the public schools are being underfunded while we are shifting more and more funds into private and charter schools. So unless they want to significantly increase funds overall, like all they're doing is shifting funds away from public schools. But maybe, I guess that's the goal. So success for them. I don't know how to fight that, honestly. I see it as a runaway train.
I would say your baseline of that the school choice train has left the station, I think, is spot on. I mean, it's been happening now for 20 years, and it's not going anywhere. This governor has expressed his support for school choice. Obviously, the House and the Senate have been wildly consistent in their support for school choice. That part isn't changing. I do think that the place for us to get a footing is in the question of equity. And there are reasonable champions for the traditional public school model in the legislature who are in positions of influence, who can make that argument on our behalf and along with us. And I think everything I'm hearing from this dais is consistent with what other school districts around the state are saying, what the FSBA is saying, what the District School Superintendents Association is saying. So there's great, I think, consistency of message, because that's the point that has to be driven home. Unwinding or putting the toothpaste back in the proverbial tube of school choice is not happening. But the consistency of message on equity, I think, is where our time ought to be spent on these funding priorities.
That's right.
Yeah, so until we get back to third grade.
Okay. Well, I will just caveat on a couple things they brought up. I would be remiss if I didn't say something about our support staff, because that's where I came from. And so, I mean, yes, the emphasis is on teacher salaries, but our support staff is there also, and we're very low in the state. Out of 67 counties, I think we're like 66. So that's not very good there. So we need to do something as far as that as well. But then also, my big thing too that I hear a lot from on the instructional side is we have 3 different salary schedules for our teachers. And it's because they want to get rid of our tenured teachers to make them go to this salary, and then the next year they come out with this salary, and it caused this person that's in the middle, they say, if I quit, come back, I can make $5,000 more, but that's only if we really hire you back, and we may have to say we can't hire you back because we don't have that $5,000, But still, I mean, it's something that Tallahassee, they created this, we didn't. They put it on us, and so I think they need to relook whenever they look at raising and bringing the teacher's pay to where it's going to be, that they look at and say, okay, we just need one salary schedule. We're not going to mess with the tenure teachers and try to do anything to them. They've been faithful to these school systems all across the state for all these years. Why do we just want to cut ties with them? We don't want to do that. I mean, these people have worked for our Lake County teachers that worked for us some 20, 30 years. Why do we want to treat them this way? I don't see it. But that's what the state did to us. We didn't do it. And so I'm like, this is not right. We're the ones being blamed, but so I think that's whenever they're doing this, they need to look at how do we correct this problem. We bring our tenure teachers up to where they need to be, and then our starting teachers start here, but they're not on the same, they're in the same pay schedule, but not on the same level as your starting teachers to your tenure teachers that have been here for 20-something years. When you got a teacher starting out making a few $1,000s less than a teacher that's been here for 25 years, there's a problem. It's a morale problem. So, and then on the classified side, you have some similarities there as well. People come in and they can move up as well as someone who's been here 15 years. But that's nothing to do with the state. That's us there. Okay. The other thing too is.
Sorry, Chairman.
Yes.
Classified. Tell me, help me with what that means.
What's a classified?
Classified is our support staff, our
Got it.
custodians, our cafeteria workers,
it.
bus drivers, all the
It's just-
things
so
that
that's
are not
another way of
instructional.
referring to the support staff that you started with.
Everything that's
Got it.
not considered instructional.
Got it.
Okay. Then PICO funding, which is another big issue. I mean, all across the state, that's been done away with, and then monies that used to be there given to charter schools and things of that nature there. And we're having to take and go and impact fee money, and then we're being hit by the public in Lake County and the contractors especially. We can't build houses because we're paying, this person's having to pay this much money in impact fee just for school system. And we would be able to maybe bring that down if they would fund us like they should for our new construction.
Or the 2 mills, that used to
Oh,
be.
yeah. Yeah, bring
That's
it up
probably
from
what
the
maybe more
1.5 to 2 point, that would
It used to
help.
be.
Raise your
Yeah.
cap back.
Well, it used to be,
Yeah.
it used to be 2, and then, of course, the reduction over time. So you look at our impact fee, and he's got a very valid point there. Lake's impact fee is much more significant than the other surrounding districts, and why is that? Because we're just so far behind the 8 ball in building student stations.
And when the,
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
when the evaluation of our impact fee statewide and why we need it, there was one county that they haven't even done anything to their impact fee in, I forget, 15, 20 years, I think it was, or something like that was presented to us, that because they don't need it. They have so much money coming in, they don't need it in their district. Well, we are ones that we don't have that kind of money coming in, and we're having to take money to build schools, but we're having to tax the people. And I hear it from cities, I hear it from contractors. You're hurting us in our construction here in Lake County because of the impact fees.
Seems like the 1.5 mils is just not created equal. What 1.5 mils generates on our ad valorem tax base versus another district that is,
Yeah.
Has Disney World.
has Disney World. Right, that's a good one.
Well, I think that, obviously it's politically expedient for them, for the legislature, because they like to push taxes down to the local level so that then they're not raising taxes and other people are raising taxes. So I think there's that. So I would think it would be reasonable if we could suggest that they allow school boards to raise that 1.5 to 2. Like, give us the ability to make the vote, since they obviously don't want to make that decision at the state level. At least we could make the argument that we were making it for all schools at our level.
Yeah, because we're like the only ones who don't get to decide any sort of millage, and so then we would face the public just like every other municipality and the county government does, and when we say this is our proposed millage, then, we've got to balance what taxpayers are willing to take on versus what our needs are, and maybe there's a portion above the 1.5 that comes, the state says to levy that we get to actually truly have discretion over, and say, we'll levy a 1/10 or 2/10
What would
or
that-
3/10.
Totally hypothetical. What would that $0.5 mean?
Oh, gosh, I know it means like it.
And I'm not suggesting that you would actually go the full way. I'm not, just,
He's run the numbers.
We've lost 120 million?
Probably around $500,000 would probably about 13, 14 million.
that's if you raised it back to what it used to be and then allowed you to, and then you chose to levy the full 2.
So just that $500,000 would then create the funding to build a brand new school every other year. That's
So-
pretty significant.
Since 2010, when they lowered it to 1.5, we've lost $110 million in this district alone.
And I'm going to just piggyback because it was funding related. You spoke about the new initiative in regards to streamlining or or looking at the funds that were going to shift based on who's going into what field, and that they wanted to establish fields that were going to allow people to be successful and have a good job with a good wage. And so where does teaching fall into that? I guess when you were speaking about that, that made me think, who in the world would want to go into teaching if you're 20 years in and you're making what a beginning person at a trade job would make? And so when we're talking about recruitment and retention of teachers, and I hear them looking at tracking all this money, and is it a livable wage, what are they going to discern that as? Because it's actually going to backfire, and we're not going to have people going into the field of education, which we're already seeing. At UCF, I can only speak for UCF, but I can guarantee you it's national. We were looking at our numbers this year at the beginning of the year in a faculty meeting, and we have lost we have 1/5 of what we had 5 years ago in our education department. We had 10 satellite campuses. We have 3 now, 10 to 3. We barely have enough people to graduate to fill in these holes that we're talking about, but we're speaking about looking at how do we funnel people into good careers that are going to be sustainable and have them have a good income, and it's not going to be education. So when we talk about equitable funding and then considering what the future of public education looks like, there's some serious concerns if we're going to start tracking these livable wages, and will teaching even fall into that? And I can tell you we've already cut our early learning programs because we know that there is no money in being a daycare worker, right? So we know we had people that specialize in early childhood education, and those programs have almost been eliminated. So we don't have early childhood experts now. And we know that's where it happens. We know what kindergarten, first and second grade can do or not do for a child's success in school. So it gave me just kind of some chills when you were speaking about that. And that's why you talked about another bill with the $50,000, and it took me off track a little bit. And if I speak a little bit more about the new requirement for the reading endorsement that we're having teachers do. So in the state of Florida, we had such a critical teacher shortage that we decided to let anyone with a college degree become a teacher, right? This was several years ago. The trains left the station, but now we keep requiring these additional endorsements. And when I've spoken to groups of teachers, the teachers that didn't go to teacher education programs are the ones that don't know how to typically teach reading or need the additional support from the district programs that we have to offer, even though charter schools don't. So we're requiring all these additional endorsements and certifications for teachers when in reality the people that are teachers don't need that extra support. It's the people that we have to bring in off the streets to teach our children because we don't have enough people going into the field of education because it's not lucrative. So I think it all goes back. I think you funnel down this way and funnel back this way if we could just get equitable funding. All of the things we're talking about, we don't have to choose which people we pay in our district what, if we could just have the equitable pot of money to make the decisions with. So at a local level, we would make the right decisions. We wouldn't have to have this adversarial relationship with our employees and our unions because we want the same things that they want. We want to be able to pay our people. We just can't because the money that's tied in different arenas. So.
Going back to the FEFP and charter schools versus public schools, this is one that they should be united because within the FEFP and the equity, they would be funded at the same rate. So they would also get an increase for those schools. So they should be on board with us, not adversarial to us. They get the FEFP.
Yeah, oh, sure.
So they get the same dollars we would get. So they should be on board with us. The one that I forgot about is, because it's a little bit nonsensical to me, but there's a House Bill 157. It was filed by Anthony Sabatini, and it's term limits on school board members. That this board member's position is that I don't think term limits are bad, and it sounds good, but I think it should be a local decision, not top-down from Tallahassee. The other conversation I've had with Anthony, and he may get behind it if you guys talk to him, is I've said for 6 years, 7 years now, what keeps people in politics are the benefits after the fact. So if we ended retirement benefits, they participated in the Florida retirement system, and today the legislature, they contribute 3%, taxpayers 56% for their retirement. That at the local level, us, we chip in 3%, 48.82 the taxpayers pay. That's $38 million a year. Kind of throw it towards our kids instead of towards politicians that when you leave, you should leave with your hat in your hand and you should not get these benefits. I feel very strongly about it. They can do it by law or by referendum, and I don't care which. Now, Mr. Sabatini said that, Representative Sabatini said he's going to get behind the ending benefits. So I have that screenshot. So if you need it. But let us end that. And then we would see real term limits for those that care about kids, in our case, or those that are there for the retirement later.
Well, we'll talk to Representative Sabatini about that and about term limits. I can tell you that's been term limits for school board members first really got traction, it's almost been 2 years ago now, in the Constitution Review Commission. And it was wrapped into one of the ballot initiatives that ultimately got struck from the ballot for other reasons, but it was bundled with these other issues. And then it was passed by the House last year, ultimately stripped out by the Senate. The School Board Association statewide was very active in making sure that that was removed for the very same reason. Not that term limits are inherently bad, but it's a decision that ought to be made at the local level. And so I am not shocked at all that that was filed again. Not shocked that Anthony's the one that brought it up, Representative Sabatini, but it will be part of the dialogue this session, and we'll keep a very close eye on it.
Well, the bizarre thing to me is that it doesn't apply to any of the other constitutional officers. You know, why school boards? Is this just another case where the state says, you know what, public schools, we don't really value you, and so let's take your school boards, and maybe there are some people who there that you value that have been serving a long time, or maybe they've gathered the experience, now they are the ones who are trying to stand up to Tallahassee. Let's replace all those people with a constant revolving door of newbies. Or then I look at some districts where, my goodness, where you got like 7,000 voters in the district, and how do you find 5 people who are willing to even do the job? I just don't think it's for everybody. I think it's a local decision. You know?
I also think that, I mean, it should be argued, it is a job, and it's a job that you gain skill in, just like any other job. You know, you get training and you gain skill, and I do think it's a little absurd that they would impose the cutting up, you know, the stopping, and I don't have a dog in the fight, you know, I'm not running again. So like, you know, I just think it's weird because I have learned a lot about budget and, you know, very detailed information into schools and statute and stuff, and that would only grow if you know, if as people continue, and you get people who, of course, in any job, but an election is a term limit also. So in any job, if you have somebody who's just a putz or whatever, you know, they can be removed. But you also get people who are very skilled at their work. So I think that should be discussed.
Yeah, I don't know, and Chris, Angie, y'all disagree with me if you want to. I don't know that the politics, particularly in the Senate, have changed at all to allow that to get traction this year. I think the politics in the House are largely the same, and you'll see it move. But I don't think there's been any sea change in the Senate that would change their position on this to be any different than it was last session. And speaking of the CRC, which where this originated, this Constitutional Revision Commission, the Senate is actively moving legislation for the second year in a row that would eliminate the CRC altogether. So they are, I think, as a body, inherently reflexive against term limits, particularly being imposed on school boards and being put in the Constitution. Those types of things, they sort of take a step back from. I don't know if y'all disagree.
Completely agree with that.
You know, the other piece,
But
though,
we'll keep an eye on it.
worthy of conversation is this benefits piece. And I think where I'm hesitant of the unintended consequences of stripping away all benefits is that then you lose a segment of the population who would not be able to do this because they are not well off. You know, you look at our teachers who have run for school board across the state, and you tell them, now you're going to leave the classroom and you're going to lose all of your benefits. I don't know how many of them could do the job because they're not financially well off because of the pay that the state gives teachers.
The only thing I'm speaking about is retirement.
Sure.
Is retirement. And so if
so
if you came and you were passionate to serve, then you would serve a term or two, and you would leave and go back to your job. So, and that would, so I don't know that.
So maybe for school boards, then you make the retirement equal to the first year for a regular teacher. It doesn't need to be the percentage for elected officials. It could be teacher retirement. Okay, so I left the classroom making $37,800, I think, at the time.
Right.
I've got kids at home. I say, what job can I go do and still dedicate myself to this adequately and do the homework that I want to do and be the school board member I want to be and do it well? And by the way, maybe I get another job on the side that it's got to have the flexibility to be at all the things that I'm at. You know, when Claremont Elementary is receiving a playground check, I need to be there and support those kids. And I'm going to say, oh, sorry, I can't do that because I got to work. For me, that's missing the bar on service. And so I can't say you can strip away all benefits because I'm not going to leave my job making $37,000 and say now not only am I going to not make more than that, I'm going to take a pay cut to do this job, but now I'm going to do it without any sort of retirement. I got to have some sort of continuity. So I'm just saying, make the benefit equal to a teacher. And that's honestly what I thought it was when I took this. I didn't know what elected officials are making. And I'm in full support of reviewing those benefits across the board, but maybe for us it's not, you take it away altogether because there are so many teachers in our classrooms who can't afford to leave the classroom, if that's even surprising for those people.
I think that for me and my service, that I have seen, not necessarily school board, but school board, county commission, where instead of doing it for the right reasons, they were doing it for that.
Absolutely true.
That ring out there.
Absolutely true.
And that if we said that, and I totally hear you, but it shouldn't be, if you're paid a salary, as we all are on the board, that when you leave, what right do we have to collect a check down the road for not even serving? It just doesn't seem to be logical to me. And just so you know, that when I leave, it's $1,900 a month I get for life. Is that crazy? Like legit?
That is crazy. And I support making it streamlined with a teacher.
I don't get that.
I didn't either.
I didn't, yeah.
Well, I don't really.
Yeah,
Son.
So, and I don't know how you get all the other elected people on board, because you look at our constitutional officers all sitting at $154,000 a year versus us at 38 or 39. But
Well, see, and that's part of, again, this rigged system is the years add up, and then it's your last 4 years that count. So you'll see them jump depending on how much it pays. And we have a couple in Lake County that publicly served and now took these constitutional positions.
that's right.
That their retirement exponentially jumped.
That's right.
And they're not shy about talking about it, by the way. So end it.
I agree. There's a real problem in there,
Yeah.
but it's worthy of dialogue to figure out how to fix it without what are the repercussions down the road.
There is, just at the risk of tempering expectations, there's annually conversations about state retirement. Several years ago, about a decade ago, they went through a massive reshifting or reshaping of the drop program and what that looks like. And how, you prevent the double dipping that was taking place back then. That's been mostly cleaned up. I don't know that this is the type of thing that can get legs in this legislature. Not because philosophically that you wouldn't have folks who agreed with you. I just think the totality of a change like that is overwhelming in a 60-day session, particularly in an election year. But by all means, we'll have some conversations and see what appetite.
That actually is one of the reasons, because it hadn't gotten legs. Actually, I had one state representative tell me I was absolutely crazy because every one of them are sucking on that nipple. And so how do you get them away from it? So they're not going to do it. The only hope is that we do have our local representative is a bit of a firestorm, Representative Sabatini, and he would perhaps, well, he told me he's going to send you the screenshot. So at least make it a public discussion. So I don't think me as a voter, before I ever got into service, realized that when the person left office, that I was continuing to pay them until they passed away. Most people don't realize that. And if it could get on a referendum, I don't think any of those that are benefiting from it are going to vote to end it, but at least let the public have that opportunity. That's what I'm asking. Put it on a referendum, and let's see. If you're going to put school board limits as a referendum, then let us then look at what these benefit, what the public thinks about that. By the way, it's interesting that at school board would be 8 years, because at 8 years, you're fully vested. So they even have taken care of their own in that respect. It's wrong. It's totally wrong, in my opinion.
All right.
Anybody else on funding? Because I know everybody wants to jump in on third grade.
Not me.
All right. I guess we're ready to talk third
I
grade.
pretty much could leave now. I agree with all them.
Yeah, I guess we can talk third grade. And actually, this is a conversation I had with Representative Sabatini about this, knowing that he's not afraid to kind of challenge the status quo, and we know that 2003 mandatory retention for students who scored a level 1 on the FSA has been around, I think, since like 2003. So it's been here for a while, and the state would probably tout all these sorts of benefits that they'd claim from it, but in reality, it's, when I talked to him, I told there are 3 reasons you need to get rid of this thing. I lost my page. First was that it's not sound educational practice. You know, if we're talking about what really helps kids, it's not just having them do all the same work all over again. Second, it's harmful to their well-being. We talk about, my goodness, somebody painted a picture the other day of just imagine these kids who've been retained and now reaching puberty 2 years before all their classmates, and what that looks like in the room when we could have provided some other support. That's, these are commonly the kids that are either bullying or being bullied. We see the behavior issues, we see the social issues. If I recall, I think it was last year, Dr. Weiskopf, when she was talking about the importance of finding alternatives to retention, she shared the story with us with a student who had aged out of athletics, and like this was his best hope of getting some college money, college acceptance, and then he wasn't able to play the senior season. I'm fuzzy on the details, but I almost remember something along those lines. We saw the Doug Fisher video recently, and he talks about how this is a stigma for people even decades later. That's and I think the district could probably get y'all a clip of that video. That even decades later, that's like the first thing out of their mouth when they meet this guy, that he's an educator, and they say, "Oh, I was retained back in first grade." That haunts you for life. So I mean, if we're talking that this is harmful for the child, not sound educational practice, because there are a million other things that we could do that are going to actually produce some good results, then why are we not pursuing one of those? But like I said, the state says great gains from this, right? We're not going to move you on until you're ready. Now we've identified you as a struggling reader. But in reality, the gains are so short-lived they're not even funny. So example, last year, 20% of the students across the state scored a level 1 in 3rd grade. In 4th grade, that jumped to 19%. Okay, great. We're moving the needle in the right direction. We have fewer kids scoring level 1. Oh, the next year it's back to 20. And then in 6th grade, it's 21, and the number continues to climb. So any sort of gain that they thought from retaining a kid in 3rd grade is not there. It's not there for the long term. Instead, we're talking about what produces some long-term gains. It's about addressing these kids in the early years. So one of the things that I was very passionate about when I began the service on the board was about putting that support in the earliest levels. I was teaching kindergarten. I had kids come to me who didn't even know their ABCs. They could not sing the ABC song. They couldn't hold a pencil the right way. And I thought, okay, now I got to get you ready for 1st grade. How am I going to do this? Being the guy in the room, I need more hands. I need more support. So our school had an extra allocation and used a teacher as an extra support who floated among all the kindergarten rooms, providing additional support to the most struggling students. And I'll tell you that when those students had matriculated to 3rd grade, we saw like an 8-point jump in the reading scores at that school from the year that those kids were, 2nd to 3rd. That shows you that if you give them a good foundation, 3rd grade teachers don't have to perform the miracles and backflips. But how can we support that as a district? Because now we're talking about, we've cut allocations the last couple of years to try to rein in our budget. Schools don't have that kind of flexibility anymore of an extra allocation that just happens to be floating around out there. So there needs to be some serious investment in the early years. And then, you want to talk about where this money comes from? Let's talk about the cost of 3rd grade retention. This is the other thing I shared with Representative Sabatini. 18,000 retentions in 3rd grade last year. That's by far very sizable compared to any other grade level. And using a nice round number of $7,000 a kid, that's $126 million the state spent on 3rd grade retention last year. Multiply that over all the years, you got a rather significant pot of money there. And the other thing, thinking about where are we losing money as a district, it's parents are choosing to go away from public schools because of this 3rd grade retention. They're going to say, I'm going to put my kid in a private school because I know they'll advance on. And then, so now the state so now we as public school districts are losing that funding because we don't have those kids sitting in our seats anymore. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. Something's got to move on that. We need a local process to be able to identify which kids are ready and which kids aren't, and which ones we can move on with some support, and what those supports look like for each kid, as opposed to just using this whole cookie cutter approach and say, right? Why should we hold you back? And all of these, when this, you've got this one narrow segment of your academic life that's a struggle. So let's repeat third grade. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, there's been, I'll respond only in this way. We'll have to do, I think, the obvious answer is we're going to have to do some due diligence in Tallahassee to see what the appetite would be for modifying that. It hasn't been, and I recall very vividly when that was put into place and in the years and the sessions that followed, there was significant focus on this. Is it working? If not, why? If so, why? And the legislature spent a good amount of time in that in the late part of that first decade since it happened. I don't recall there being a significant amount of focus on this or discussion in the last few years, but it's something that we can certainly chat with the policymakers about, and the chair of the House Education Committee happens to be in her delegation. I think you start there to see what, if anything, she's hearing from her committee staff and from others in Tallahassee about this issue, because if anybody is getting spoken to about it or researching it, it would be her and her committee. So I think we start with Representative Sullivan and Senator Stargell, who chairs the Education Appropriations Committee, and you mentioned the money that's invested in this. I think we start there, have some conversations, and see what the appetite is. Again, I want to be clear about expectations. Sure. That's a big conversation, and one that, while I think Lake ought to be a leading voice on it, is not one that you can go alone on.
That's right.
And so, with that as sort of the umbrella of the conversation, I'd be happy to go take that to Tallahassee in the next couple of weeks and just see what appetite there is, or at least examining it again, taking a deeper look at it. If it's been a few years since we have, let's see if it's working, and then decide what the direction is from there.
Can I ask one question? So as we've spoken today, and you've made your notes, when do we hear whether there's an appetite or not an appetite, or what we can do to support you?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. I think consistent with our practice over the years of working with you, we'll condense this meeting in partnership with your superintendent into sort of a working, living memo of what we think the priorities of this board are. We will then be tasked with taking those to Tallahassee and coming back to you with a real sense of what's in the realm of the possible. From the funding, whether we decide on a special appropriation like we have the last couple of years, to compression, to DCD, all the things we've talked about today, what's in the realm of the possible in an early election year session, given the political makeup of what's going on up there. And then we'll take that, 10 priorities and shrink them down to the ones that we're going to spend the most of our time on. But yeah, I think there'll be, I would envision, continual conversation between us and your staff that sort of gives a sense of what we're going to be working on once session kicks off in January.
You can take the DCD part off, because I'm over that one. I really
Well, that
want
one's
the
going to be
compression.
talked about whether we want it to or not, right? Because
Right.
they funded the study.
They funded it as we'll give you this, you think you're going to do it.
Yes and no. I mean, it was, I think it was a legitimate attempt, to pacify us who wanted,
Right.
us and the other compression districts who wanted compression to be made permanent. But there is a sense from Senator Stargell, Representative Latvala, who chairs Education Appropriations in the House, that over the next several years, since they still each have, I think 4 years left for Stargell, 2 years left after this for Latvala, they wanted to take a more holistic view at the funding formula than has been taken in years past, because they saw an opportunity for continuity of leadership on those appropriations subcommittees to really try to do something meaningful. Whether or not they can is an unanswered question, but there is a commitment to try. So I do think that's going to be an issue that we need to keep an eye on, and working with you and your staff to know whether or not what recommendations come out are good, bad, or indifferent for Lake County.
But is this helpful? Because I'd never even thought about the number before on the third grade retention. And what is that number?
Well, across the state, it was about 18,000 students retained last year, and that equates to $126 million.
So $126 million that again goes towards equity. I mean, like if you begin to take some of these, like the third grade retention, could you weigh it with, we're going to build equity by ending this inequity? Is there any sense to that?
you're applying logic to it sometimes. And I don't mean that jokingly. I don't think it's reasonable for us to go to Tallahassee and say we should stop third grade retention right now. I don't think that gets you into the room, much less
Right.
leads a conversation. Now, working with our partners, I think we can very likely start a conversation about, is this having the intended consequence that we wanted 20 years ago, or 18 years ago, whatever it was when it started? That's a place to start. I don't think, the hammer and the nail analogy. I mean, we want to lead a conversation, not get smacked on the head. And that I think is where we're going to come alongside you to help drive what's in the realm of the possible.
Well, when I first came up with that whole spreadsheet, it was because legislators that I spoke to didn't even understand the FEFP. And so it was able, in a really quick moment,
Yeah.
show them how they have tied our hands and are underfunding.
Well, we mentioned term limits. There's a correlation to having only 8 years in the House and 8 years in the Senate, and it is often those more seasoned members, like a Senator Stargell, who served in the House, now in the Senate, who, given the benefit of time of service, actually understand it now, and are willing to take a hard look at some of the more difficult decisions that need to be made to create that equity, because otherwise you don't know where the bathrooms are before your second term's over, much less how to pass a bill, much less how a very convoluted formula works. So, that's, again, where we and staff have to work together, and staff not only in the district but in Tallahassee, to find what's in the realm of the possible, given the other politics and issues that are going on in a shortened session. Yeah. It's not a good answer, but it's the
No,
truth.
I just don't want us chasing our tail. And so I'd rather know upfront what we have a chance at and don't have a chance. And if we don't have a chance of equity, then at some point, this board has a conversation with our council that they're in violation of the law. And once you really go strong in that way, you've kind of ended your relationship. So that's like the nuclear version.
So,
But
And I-
I'm like over it now. Like, I'm legit that Tallahassee gives us no local control. They underfund us, and then they say it's up to a school board to work out. That is not fair, like legit not fair. And so if we need to show them that they're in violation of the law, I'm like this close. Like, I'm one session away from, that's where my head's at.
And to be clear, I'm not saying I'm arguing against any student ever being retained. Just I want local
Oh, I
control.
know.
Because when we're seeing 18,000 students retained in third grade, but we're seeing like 2,000 or 3,000 potentially in any of the other grades, you can see there's a huge spike there. What that test is doing versus what local decisions are allowing, and
Right. I think I also wanted to bring up the fact that one of the ways in which you should be aware that maybe Representative Sullivan's office finds this to be helpful is that basically by doing the third grade retention in third grade specifically, they're redshirting kids, like you would in sports, so that they have an extra year. So then when they take the NAEP test, the Nations Report Card test, we have a bump in our reading scores in fourth grade. That goes away by eighth grade, but that's where that bumps comes from, is that supposedly those kids, so that's a political driver for this dumb law. And the other thing that gets argued on the floor, and I've heard it argued, I wanted to mention Linda Cobert did a study in Orange County. She's an Orange County board member, like last year, the year before, on this, and found it to be a failure. Placencia and Mayfield did file a bill on it, but it went nowhere, and I'm sure that was somewhat political. But what is often argued with this is that the portfolio is a method that allows teachers to override the state law. And in practice, the portfolio, to create a student portfolio, you're literally talking about a binder like this of the kids' work that shows 3 examples of everything. If you, we have, now in Lake County, we have a D, an F school and a D school. And last year we had a staff problem. And when you have not enough teachers at a school, half the teachers weren't there at the beginning of the school year, you can't get somebody to create portfolios on every kid that is like 3 inches high. And the other method of doing the portfolio is a state mandated subsection of tests. So it's like a test of mini tests. So really the mini test is the portfolio, unless you can find somebody who's willing to do that. And when you're having a school that's having a problem, all these kids are retained, and it's us that failed them because we didn't have the teachers to create ginormous portfolios so that they could all pass. So now we have a class of kids that have failed, which is very frustrating. I also wanted to mention, you wanted to say something?
I was going to say, talk about a struggle of a teacher, to add on to your argument here, is that now your third grade teacher not only has the struggling second graders that have been promoted, but now I've also got the third graders who struggled last year back in my room, and that divides, support further in that.
Right.
Yeah. How do you work with a class when you've got double your amount of struggling students than any other grade?
I also wanted to mention that I know people don't say it, but it's highly stressful on these kids, this third grade retention. They start cheering on in kindergarten and first grade, so you'll see them cheering on the third graders with signs and whatnot, but that creates they're seriously stressed out. I had a kid who was perfectly good reader, above level, who was like, I'm gonna fail, I'm not gonna pass. And, 8-year-olds shouldn't have that issue. That's weird. And also, when you have kids that are retained 2 years, you get, you don't just have bullying problems, but you have some inappropriate maturity issues. If you have a 16-year-old boy in 8th grade with a bunch of 14-year-old girls, there are issues with that, where it can be inappropriate. The age difference there, that's a high schooler in a big kid in with a bunch of younger girls, or opposite, switch that around however you want to put it, but it can be very inappropriate also. So that's another discussion point, or maybe. So I would like to at least start the conversation from us. We have Orange County who has started the conversation, maybe we get them to do a study on it this year. It's already in the literature that's a failure.
And I think you brought up the very valid point that, Lake County is not going to go in there and change the entire legislature on this, that it's going to have to be a team effort with other districts. So I guess, do y'all represent other districts as well who would be interested?
We do,
in this?
and we also represent the School Board Association statewide. So Kim McDougall, who's with our
Okay.
team in Tallahassee, has that relationship. And then I think she also has Levy County, Broward County, we're part of that team. I want to say there's one more that we've got, and we're in. We've applied for Hillsborough to represent them as well. So, and then the folks in Orange County, that's just home for
Right,
us. So
that's your backyard.
Linda's a close friend, and that board is one that I've worked with for years, just because that's home. And so, yeah, I think we know the folks who work in the school area in Tallahassee, and so we'll be, once we settle on what this living document looks like, one of the things that we always do is run that by the other school board associations and other school board lobbyists to see where there's areas of synergy and partnership, because at the end of the day, a good team in Tallahassee is always better than going it alone.
That's right.
So that's part of what we'll do as our standard practice.
So again, something that I don't really know how you work. So I was going to ask the very same question, but do you speak to the other clients that you have about our position to see if it's congruent? Because I know that when I was first on the school board, my first year in the Florida School Board Association was actually against my eliminating the DCD, so we were at odds. That's one of the reasons why I'm not a member now. And so I want to make sure that you guys, that if we were sideways with another county, that you would feel comfortable telling us that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because-
And 99.9% of the time, your issues are totally congruent with other school districts and with the association. And if and when there ever was a point where, and this is blanket, this is how we handle issues of conflict, if there ever was a time where your issue, or your position on an issue was not congruent with another client, the first thing we do is disclose that and figure out a way to work through it. We've yet to run into that with our representation of Lake County and any of the other clients that we represent. If anything, we found that your position on issues tends to be quite complementary of everything else that we find ourselves working on. But if there's ever a moment of conflict, the first thing we do is disclose it and then figure out how we best work through that.
And that's how we got to this point here where, as he said, he's not a member. There's only one board member each year that's on that. And so that we could help fund having our own people talk for us versus they just, well, we're not going to do what you want. The majority wants this, so we need somebody that represents us, and that's what we've done.
Oh, I meant to say one other thing about the portfolio, not just that it's an argument that they make, that maybe we could look at that language, and we wouldn't necessarily get rid of the law, but expand what they call, what do they call them, options? Something, I don't know, they're like alternative options for progression. Good cause exemptions.
And there are a bunch in there.
And there's a
that we've put
bunch in
over
there,
the
so
years,
maybe
right?
we look at the language of those so that we could make the language of the portfolio.
That would be more workable.
Yeah, I admittedly don't know much about the portfolio, so maybe I can look to you, Ms. Burns, to help me
Yeah,
learn more about that. But yeah, that's something we could look at.
yeah, because that might be a way to sort of fix the problem without changing the law.
Portfolio system.
We'll whittle away,
Yeah.
one line at a time.
Well, there are, a great example is what we were able to accomplish this year with the transportation thing. There are exceptions in law for a lot of different things, and finding the right exception and properly expanding on it or tweaking it to meet the needs of the district is something that not only we're pretty good at, but we have some experience doing specifically with and in partnership with y'all, so we can look at that.
Yeah.
Ms. Luke, did you have something else? All right,
I do
Superintendent.
feel like we're forgetting something that we talked about wanting to talk about.
Well,
Okay.
that's what I was looking at
We
at
talked
one of the
about one.
last board meetings we were at that we discussed quite a bit, especially you.
Did we cover them all?
I was trying to
Obviously,
reminisce.
funding's our number one.
Funding is number one. for
Yes.
sure.
Above all.
I'm trying to,
There
the
was
number
one
of,
thing,
the
though,
number
and I
of
can't
people that
remember what
we
it was.
have.
There was one thing that you were very particular on it, but it wasn't funding, it was
It's the
something else.
tests. It's the people that we have that haven't been able to be rehired because of the tests that they have to
Right,
pass.
the
That's the-
Oh,
difficulty.
the endorsements.
That's the endorsements you mentioned.
Yeah, I said
Yes.
reading endorsement, but whether it's their ELL endorsement or ESOL endorsement, or whether it's their K-6 endorsement or their 612 or their math or their science or whatever, but we accepted some temporary employment positions that we know at the end of the year, if they don't pass that assessment, then we'll have to let
But-
them go.
But I think the
And-
one was about the ESOL
ESOL,
right.
endorsement that doesn't even qualify for what we are responsible for in times.
It just doesn't, it was just, both Mr. Dodd and I have taken the 300 additional hours required for ESOL endorsement, and we can both attest that it wasn't anything that was beneficial for us. And here's the beautiful thing about that is I'm an education major and he is not. So even somebody that they think they're tailoring the education for, somebody that didn't go to school for education, didn't find it valuable either. So it's causing, and the reading endorsement is
My
going to.
wife went through that as well.
Right. So I feel like we need to
I know it
find
all
that
too well.
legislator, the one that went through some of this stuff that get it, but that's gonna.
How much does that cost?
Right, exactly. Well, that's one of those costs that we talked about that's associated with the inequity, because we have to pay, now we have to either pay our people to get this endorsement, and there's not funding for that, or we have to pay somebody to give it to them during work hours, which means we have to pay for some, so there's so many other additional costs. And that list was already, I don't know if Mr. Farnsworth has the number off the top of his head of
Oh
the
my
number of
gosh, it was
people that we
5
have out of
pages.
field. It was out of pages. That was just the one meeting. We've already hired others, and
Right.
if you
few more
couple
today.
that reading endorsement on top of that, it's just gonna make that list grow, because very few of our people get a reading endorsement. But I'm a math science person that teaches elementary. Why would I need a reading endorsement?
They have to read the math problem.
Right. Listen, we could go all day about that, but it just, I know that was a piece of it, and it was, I said reading endorsement,
If
but
we're
it's
going to
any
talk about that, I want
endorsement
to talk
that we
about fifth grade math too, because I'm personally struggling
have. You
with
can
that.
call
right
me
now.
with that if you need to.
Well, and
Superintendent, I didn't mean
maybe,
to
you know, we
interrupt
look at the number of hours, you know, like if they want to have the ESOL endorsement, which is just to teach the concept of how to teach a person who doesn't speak your language, which is a bizarre thing to teach, then maybe that can be taught in 4 hours and not 300.
Or
you
maybe
know?
we figure out a way to keep the accountability. Like, what are they looking for as the outcome? Because we're not seeing improvement in those subcategories based on the 300 hours of ESOL instruction. So why are we continuing to do practices that we don't see the results in? And we're just requiring teachers to do more
And
and
I
more
don't
and
even
more.
know, is that in law at 300 hours, or was that come up with by the DOE? Do we know?
It's in the meta consent
Elementary
decree.
school teachers had to
It's
take
in the what?
300 hours.
Meta consent decree,
Mm.
all the required
dissent
training.
decree.
And,
Anyway,
All right,
something to
superintendent's got a
figure
couple.
that out. Yes, go.
I do. I'll tell you, a big one for me is, and I might have to defer to my legal counsel here for some help on this one, is the school safety drills. And this is Florida Statute 1006.07. And in 4A, it talks about active shooter drills being done as often as other drills. And originally, the interpretation was most drills are done once a semester, with the exception of fire drills. And that was the council in collaboration with other attorneys across the state, that's how it was interpreted. Only later did the DOE put out information that said, no, you have to do active shooter drills once a month. I can tell you, that is way too much for our kids.
Yes.
And for our staff, and I think that you will not find anyone who will disagree. That is not a good thing for kids, and it's not serving an intended purpose by constantly doing these active shooter drills. So I would like, the language is there, it's the interpretation of the law. It says as often as other drills. We'd like it to be defined as often as other drills such as the hurricane, and the only one that is done monthly by law is the fire drill. But all those other drills that we do are all once a semester. So it's the interpretation of that.
They need to come out and actually say what they want. If they want it once a semester, they need to say once a semester. I mean, it's a very small change. Right now, the language is ambiguous at best about,
Yeah, they're loud today.
Yeah, but
it's
he was.
ambiguous at best about how often it's supposed to. And you, I don't mean to disagree with the superintendent, but you will find somebody who believes that it's, well, and they wear badges. They will disagree with you and tell you that you need to have it once a week.
But we need to, make kids safe and teach them, not traumatize them.
And I'm going to tell you, we've already had this conversation at night with my 6-year-old. It has come up, and I knew exactly what we were talking about when it came up. So as a mom with a first grader, knowing that these drills are happening, and it wasn't, he just said, Mom, if somebody bad comes to my classroom, which is a good conversation to have, but I don't want to have it every month.
We can work together on what that language needs to look like, and we'll bring it to the right people.
Okay.
And then the other one I'd like to look at is 1008.44. This is the CAPE industry certification list, which is actually generated by CareerSource, but one of those that they have not put on the list is the teaching academies qualifying for industry certification. And so those types of programs, as valuable as they are, and increasingly needed, and I know there's a lot of districts that are developing these teaching academies. We're not getting any state funding for them through CAPE because they don't consider it as an industry. So it depends, again, on whose definition of industry do you use. Obviously, the one that CareerSource is using, it does not meet the definition of an industry. But because it is in statute and ultimately they approve that list, maybe some pressure to change their definition, to realize the value of these teaching academies and the impact that they're having, and we would like to get some funding for those programs. So we'd love to see that one added to the list.
So to clarify, that's a CareerSource's definition of what academies should receive funding doesn't include teaching academies.
That's correct.
So not in the law, it's the CareerSource's.
Yes,
Okay.
and that list then goes into law, so.
Got it. We can work on that.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about advanced opportunities for kids and funding, one thing that jumped to my mind was, combing through the FEFP one year was looking at the weighted FTE that district would receive for IB or ACE diplomas. AP Capstone was not on the list at the time, is it now? It's still not,
No,
I
it's-
imagine.
It's not, yes. We talked about this one last year, so
That's
thank you.
right.
This was another one that we really wanted to look at.
AP
that
Capstone
weighted-
should be part of the IB ACE listing for weighted FTE funding.
Yeah, and they don't weight them any longer either, and so those programs have decreased in funding as
Okay.
well. Yeah, I think last year we actually had that on our list of priorities, was to add back the weighted funding for those programs. We can pull that language back out.
Yep, we can work on that too.
Of course, if you just fix the overall equity issue and we get $20 million, I won't squabble over AP capstone funding.
There you go.
Exactly. We quit these peanuts.
But right now, we're just really grasping at every penny we could find. I mean, really, because, I mean, we look at the budget now, and it's really not an expenditure issue, especially after you've already trimmed out $7 million in the last couple of years. It's a revenue problem. It's a revenue problem for us.
And I think it started in 2008 with the recession, and there was cuts, but there was never a restoration.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if you take the impact fee and everything back in 2008 to now, and what all happened and transpired, it was cut and all, and we wouldn't have the funding problem
And
if
the
growth would have
0.5%,
kept going.
I think, was
But
then.
yeah,
And then there was the rollbacks in the last 3 or 4 years.
so,
Not to mention the property values being decreased.
Right.
that's correct.
And then they can only increase 3% a year, and in some cases lost 40%.
Big time.
So, perfect storm.
Anyone else?
Can I just tell you guys thank you? Like, I know you're hearing the passion, like, we're like, what is the problem, and da-da-da, and I know you guys are up there and you have the relationships and the advocation and the personalities that just carry this forward without maybe some of our personal aggressiveness. So
They would only talk to us one time.
No,
and I know whenever I email, that you guys tend to respond immediately, that we can have that back-to-back, conversation, and we just appreciate the openness and the willingness to
thank
work
you.
with us.
It's a great privilege to represent y'all, and we share your passion on these things. We sometimes have to temper the way we engage with that passion, and change the way we message it, but we share your passion, and we're so grateful for all that you do and all that your teachers and employees do for our kids. It means the world to us to get to carry your message, so thank you.
Yeah, and I think also on some previous comments that was made before you came up about our responsibility as a board to try to do what we can for revenue for this county, for our teachers and our staff and everything else. I think this is what we're doing through you, because our taxpayers are paying the taxes already. It's just that all the money is not coming where it should be equally across the state to us, and that's all we're asking for, so that we don't have to go out and try to do something else, ask the county to approve a 5-cent, gas tax to fund this or this for us or whatever. The people are already paying the taxes. We're just asking for what they pay to be actually equally divided out across the state and give Lake County what really belongs to us. So I appreciate all that y'all do.
Well, reflecting back to the comments that you've brought up, I mean, going back to the public input today, what can we do for local control? At what point do we stop relying on our state legislature? What are we doing here as a school board? We do have local options available to us, which I think taxpayers would not be in overly love of. But I guess at what point do we start having those conversations? Do we wait to see what the governor has unveiled and see how the legislature reacts to that? Because, I mean, certainly he puts forth some great plans some years, but then they go nowhere in terms of funding. Or do we start having some serious conversations and say, how do we ask our voters to pay for some teacher salaries? I don't know.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
I think that we've spoken about it long enough, and we've asked Tallahassee, I have for now 7 years, hat in hand, that we have to take it on our own. And I think after this session, that depending on if it's just lip service or if they truly fund public education, that would change the dynamic. That's why I'm a little passionate about the FEFP and the equity component to it. I want to know where we stand with that, because if we get no legs, then we'll have to take it on our own. And I believe with all of my heart that the taxpayers of Lake County want to invest in education, and that would be an option that we take to them. But I think we wait until this session, is my
So
opinion.
we'll see if this session
But
delivers,
not
and if
much-
not, then
but not
we get an
beyond that.
idea of what does another campaign look like?
That's right.
Going out to the voters and say our teachers need money, our bookkeepers, our bus drivers, our food service workers.
But at that point, we need everyone on board.
Yeah.
So,
Across the state.
Well,
Not
hopefully
across
they
the
just,
state, this
you
will
know,
be local.
they just
Well, I know
deliver
they-
and, a dump truck shows up with $20 million more, and then we got the equity.
and that's why it's important, to be very honest, Mr. Cladd, Ms. Cronin, that you guys are on board with where we really stand and that transparency and that understanding, because we need y'all's support. If this is going to be about, and it's going to be focused towards properly paying our district employees, period. Not just teachers, but our classified. But you need to be comfortable saying that there isn't waste over here and there isn't waste over there, and that we take our own destiny. I'm almost more inclined to do that anyway, because I saw what the voters did for us when it came to safety and security and mental health. So, again, we desperately need y'all's support and your belief that it's necessary. Because if y'all don't believe it, then I'm not going to put myself out there.
Chairman, if I may, I just want to remind
Yeah, you didn't get to speak much.
I know.
How was your trip?
It was wonderful. Thank you. I'm still a little jet lagged.
Yeah, you just flew in.
I did. Wanted to remind you of the delegation, the Lake County Legislative Delegation meeting next week on the 9th. And then also, there's not going to be an official Lake County Legislative Days this year. The Chamber Alliance is not doing that this year. So we'd love to get an opportunity to have the superintendent or any of the board members or all of you to come to Tallahassee whenever we're advocating during these committee weeks and beginning of session. So I just wanted to put that on your radar, that there's not, an official time to be coming up for Lake County. So we would welcome any opportunity that you guys would want to come up.
Okay, I also wanted to say thank you to you all. At the meeting where we approved your contract, I said that I thought that you guys were I'm really proud because I brought you guys when I very first started, but that you guys are a great return on our investment, and I really do appreciate all of the funding sources that you have gotten us. But I also really appreciate the way that now we can work with Tallahassee to make these small, like what you would think would be insignificant little changes with like the transportation, maybe the portfolio, but what turn out to be really big changes for us. Like they may think it's not a big deal, and it's things we can actually get changed and worked on to make things more functional. And so I want to thank you all for all your work.
And one thing I did forget, we are going to be writing for another ed appropriation. We're looking at expanding an HVAC program at Umatilla High School in collaboration with Lake Tech. And I had a chance last week to visit Umatilla High School with Representative Sullivan, and I know that she is in full support of this partnership with Lake Tech. Lake Tech also has a small bus now, thanks to our transportation language, so we'll be able to transport students from both Umatilla and Eustis, that zone, who are interested in going to Lake Tech for workforce dual enrollment through the HVAC program. So it's a great opportunity for the kids, and so we're excited to bring that hopefully to that school next year. And we're already in the planning stages in hopes that we get the funding for that.
How much are we asking for?
We haven't determined the amount yet. We're still working with Lake Tech on that to make sure that the ask is reasonable. And I tell you why is because we've run into some problems with the last two appropriations, because the DOE has turned down the portions that we've written for capital. So it's been very problematic in spending the funding when you're wanting to use it for the purchase of equipment to install like a large outdoor area, like in the Construction Academy, where part of the funding was set aside to do an outdoor area with a slab and trusses with an outdoor covered area for them to actually build the large structures. They didn't fund that, so we internally had to fund that on our own because the state turned that down. So I've taken that back to Representative Sullivan. She's following up on that at the state level, something to maybe put on your radar.
Yeah.
We wrote again for Eustis High School another $100,000 for another outdoor area. The state has again denied that, saying that it was not the intent when they approved it to use it for capital funding. But however, there was nothing that the legislature said that would deny us using it for capital funding. So that's.
We talked about capital in our explanation, didn't we?
We did, and we wrote specifically for it. They've turned it down now on both appropriations, and so
Yeah, let us help chase that.
okay. And if you want to reach out to Sarah Lynn, who is a representative aide, she's actually working on that and has the contact information for the folks at DOE who continue to turn it down with a very limited explanation. And so I know that Representative Sullivan's working on that as well. So
I'll be calling her today.
if we can't get around that, that will change what we might ask for in regards to the HVAC program. So we've got to work through that issue first.
Perfect. I'll be calling her today.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
And I
Thank you
am
very
signed
much.
up to speak at the delegation meeting. So want to collaborate before that?
Yes. We'll
Anything
get
you have
we'll
for
just
my?
get this condensed to something other than chicken scratch,
Okay,
and we'll begin working on what that document looks like.
okay.
And I'll get you that spreadsheet.
Can you send me, or I don't know if anyone else wants to go, like, when would be good dates?
Yeah, what I'll do is send everybody an email that says, here are the dates of the committee meeting weeks and when session starts.
That'd be
And then
awesome.
just take a look at your calendars, let us know when you can come, and we view it as part of our job is to be a force multiplier for you. So when you're on the ground in Tallahassee, we want to make it worth your time. So just let us know when you're coming.
Yeah, I know, in the past, I'm just like, keep me busy.
And we try to do
Thank
that.
you for the session part too, because I know whenever I've gone, I've only just got to meet with legislators. I haven't got to go to session, like they weren't actually having anything that was relatable to why I was there. So I would love to do that this year instead of.
Oh, and about one more thing. You all have had an opportunity, which, thank you for sitting down with Mr. Ward. He's had his chance to do his presentation for them and get their feedback on it. And now we want to take it back out to each member of our delegation. I know Representative Sullivan has already agreed to sit down with us. We're scheduling something the week of October the 8th. So your help in maybe getting the others an opportunity we'll go to them. We just need an audience with them individually to sit down and for him to go through that budget presentation for them. 30 minutes is all we're asking if we can find the time for them to give us. So,
Yep.
thank you.
Brilliant.
All right, thank you very much.
Can we take a break?
Y'all.
Yeah, buddy.
Bio break.
We're going to take about a 3 to 5 minute break for momentarily break.
3 to 5, so it would be.
Two of them. Right there. 2 or 3, actually 3. All right, we're moving on, calling this back into session. 3.02 is an actionable item, and also 3.03, do we want to work those together, or you want to work them individually?
Are there any questions about it?
3.02,
I'd entertain hearing a recommendation from the superintendent that was grouped.
Well, I am happy to do that.
thank you.
I am recommending approval of items 3.02 and 3.03. These are both action items for human resources.
So moved.
Second. Third.
We have many seconds and thirds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Moving on to 3.04, and that's the superintendent's evaluation. Mr. Johnson.
Yes, sir. This time, excuse me, at this time of year, we put together the superintendent's evaluation based upon a document that was agreed to between the superintendent and the board earlier. I apologize, I don't have it to put on the screen, but what that document is a set of 5 different standards: vision, culture, and instructional leadership, operations, resource and personnel management, board governance and policy, communication and community relations, and ethical leadership form the first part of the evaluation. The second part is annual superintendent student performance objectives. Those objectives deal specifically with performance of students. The board is asked to rank each one from 1 to 5 of the subcategories under each job performance standard. 1 being unsatisfactory, 2 needs improvement, 3 reasonable progress, 4 meets expectation, and 5 exceeds expectation. What I provided for you today is I've taken all of the individual evaluations that were completed by the board members and compiled them into one document. The last document attached in the packet that I gave you are the board member comments. For ease of reading of anyone who is interested, they can go through, and all the comments made by all 5 board members are on in that one document. We want to just be interested in knowing what the comments of the board were. The document that sits on top is the compilation of all the scores of each individual standard and each subsection of each standard. As you can see, the Standard 1, Vision, Culture, and Instructional Leadership, they are listed, the 4 subcategories. The board members are listed alphabetically, and then the average for each subcategory is in the right-hand column. For example, on Standard 1, the averages for the 4 subcategories were 4.2, 4.8, 4.4, and 4.2. If you look down at the bottom of that first page, there's a typo that misspells average. But that number, 4.61, is the average of all of the scores on all of the standards under the first part of the evaluation. The second page is a listing of the scores for the student performance objectives. As you can see on the right, I've averaged the board members' ranks for each objective. All of those exceed 4.0, and they average 4.8. Other than that, and there's a page of Mr. Matthias's that has scribbles all over it. Was an error to leave that on there. Those are my scribbles, not Mr. Matthias's. We'll replace that page with the page that goes to Natalie.
Notice it either.
Huh?
We didn't notice it.
I didn't even notice it.
Are you, when you remove the scribbles, will you have the updated grammar, or?
Yes,
Mr. Mathias's
the
grammar?
scribbling is, the scribbling was just my notation, and that page got left in there. All the others that had that on it were cleaned up. So, with that, then, Mr. Chairman, the time for the board to consider the evaluation and approve it, understanding that I haven't changed anybody's scores. I've merely taken them all, put them together, averaged them for you, and put the comments in one section so that we have a compilation of, hopefully it's now with the average scores, a representative of the entire board's evaluation of the superintendent.
I move we accept the evaluations.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
I did want to say that I thought that the evaluation was much easier this year to complete, and I like the formatting and everything. Like, that was much easier. It was just made it easier, all online, and it was great.
It was easier for us to
Yeah.
put the comments together.
Oh, good.
And the other thing, too, by having fewer indicators, you get to the more impactful ones, just as we've done for teachers, where we're looking at the 6 performance objectives for teachers, and looking at their evaluations, a simplified version. It makes sense here at this level also to figure out what is most impactful on the district and evaluate that.
The only other thing I wanted to say was, this is my personal opinion. When Moxley was superintendent, she used to annually give up her bonus. I personally thought that was not necessary, like not helpful. It's not money that, I guess it's I don't know. I don't know who it motivates more. I think if you've worked for something and it's part of your salary, then you should get your salary.
If I could qualify for
Do
just a
that every
second,
time.
because during my service and negotiations, when we put in the performance matrix and we put in the board, so we gave it some opportunities for bonuses, if you will, and she reduced her base salary. That
Moxley did?
She did, 5%. At that time, one of them she owed because the data wasn't in time. It wasn't that she just did it, that there was a reason that she did it. So she did accept it her last year. And I think that it's a little bit disingenuous because we put these performance matrix in to give that opportunity for performance, for you to pay for that success. That the idea, excuse me, that particularly for those of us that are close to the scene and boots on the ground kind of, that see the effort and time that our superintendent puts into making our district great, to then even suggest that for some reason she would give it back, I don't even understand why that would be, because she's earned it. And that's what we need to be focused on, everyone being able to get to a pay level that is acceptable. But in the case of thinking that giving back some bonus dollars is going to change the world, then certainly it isn't.
Right.
So I think we not have much of a discussion about that.
Yeah, he did a really good job of, that's basically my point, was that to me, it doesn't make any sense. And the dollars don't make, like, the dollars aren't gonna change anything. And, this is somebody's salary who has earned their salary. So, with that, that's all I had to say.
Okay, we got a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Moving on to board member comments. Mr. Mathias?
I'm good. I think we've commented our little butts off today.
Ms. Luke?
I just think it was really good to have the discussion that we had this morning with our local representatives that are going to Tallahassee day in and day out. So I appreciate the time to really talk about it a lot. Like I said, sometimes I felt like they were kind of absorbing some of our frustrations, but it was really nice to be given the opportunity to do that. So thank you.
And I'd just like to throw out another word of thanks to Niagara Bottling Company for coming to the rescue for the Claremont Elementary students. You know, they had a playground across the street from the school, and if you can imagine the logistics of actually going there, well, it's just not always the practical thing. And then when the thing became decrepit and needed to be removed, that made, obviously, recess time a little less enjoyable for the kids. And so now the idea that they'll actually have a great place to use some energy and take a break from what we're expecting of them in the classroom, so they can come back and into the room and be refreshed and be ready to go. That's wonderful. So thanks to them for delivering a very sizable check to make that happen.
I had the opportunity this week to, and I'll maybe talk more detail, I don't know, we'll see. I was at the audit committee, and one of the things that came up as a suggestion is we went over the East Ridge High School audit, which that particular group has been disbanded. It was the chorus audit. But what it did show was that we have a significant problem, and, you know, obviously significant problems can come up with funding, and we have a whole lot of different mechanisms for doing our like boosters and chorus funding and all this money coming in, and we want to be accountable for that. Because that's money that parents have put forward for those kids. And the suggestion was made that these groups can still be outside sources, but that the dollars should be run through the bookkeepers at the school, so that the dollars become an internal account. Mm-hmm. So they can still, you know, function and have their boards and whatnot, but that the dollars need to be run through our bookkeepers. And I was talking to my dad last night, and when he taught here in the early 80s, that was standard procedure. And at some point, it's become not standard procedure, where certain groups have outside accounts. Mm-hmm. And so I think we need to move it back to where the accounts run inside.
The problem you have with that, and I will tell you, I was a booster president for 6 years, and we had our external accounts, but we had no problems with our finances because we were not in it to try to keep a big, enormous balance in the treasury. We were trying to give it out to the athletic clubs that were working and trying to bring the funding in. But the problem you have sometimes is when you put it into internal accounts, when the athletics or something else becomes a little less, the next thing you know, your internal accounts have been kind of stripped.
What do you mean?
Well, a principal has a right to go into some internal accounts and help fund his programs if needed, because he doesn't have the transportation money, but yet over here, there's money there, So I'll take it from there and put it there. He has that flexibility.
So is that a policy we could change?
Well.
We have a
kinda
policy
rough.
right now we'd have to visit, because right now it calls for them doing 501c3s, and
Right.
we have a policy on these and so I'd have no problem revisiting it, but right now, we can't make a change because we have a policy.
No, I
about
wasn't
it.
saying we would,
Right, you
no,
have to
I'm
change
saying
policy.
we would bring
Yeah.
it up to be a policy
I think-
change.
This sounds like a great workshop topic. I
Yeah.
know that we don't often get that kind of time, quality time with Tom and his audits, but maybe this one is worthy of discussion. Probably not necessarily not necessarily that particular group, because that's already been absorbed into the internal accounts.
Right.
But what is the future of these things across the board?
I mean, I can say that.
They all are audited, though. Again, it's in the policy. There is a
Right, but this
procedure
one was
for
only
auditing.
really, the problem with this one was caught, I think, kind of late, and it was clearly very problematic where the money was going, and it's very unclear, and like the audit was just a big cluster.
But any sort of accountability that's there, okay, you eventually find it in an audit, but then at what point? What's the fix? Okay,
You don't prevent it.
How many checks were there without 2 signatures, or how many things were not noted what was even spent on? How many gift cards did they buy that you have no idea what they did with? Whereas if you had somebody going, oh, you can't do this, when they see a check go out, then you prevent that kind of stuff.
So maybe we need to workshop the policy, not necessarily East Ridge's audit, I think. Or, I mean, we can bring up the problems with it, but
Well,
I think it's just
again,
worth
it wasn't pretty.
Again, you have to begin to see where things broke down, because they're supposed to be, these 501s are supposed to be sending financials every month, and so maybe those weren't looked at. So we need to probably workshop it, maybe.
Workshop it.
I agree.
Got it.
Got it.
After
All
we
right.
get our FEFP formula funding, and then we won't worry about it. We'll give them an extra $1 million, call it a day.
Anything else?
No, I don't have anything else.
Well, just to go back on,
Oh, happy Rosh Hashanah.
what Mr. Dodds was talking about with the Niagara Bottling Company, they gave a check of $70,553, if I'm not mistaken, is what it was, for the 2 pieces of playground equipment. And once again, whenever I find someone willing to do that, I ask them, are you willing to move towards central Lake County with some of your funding? And they said they would rather stay in the Groveland area. I'm okay with that. Just keep doing what you're doing, because they did $106,000 at Groveland Elementary. That started out at $76,000, and they ended up with $106,000. And then at Lake Mineola High School, the band director came to them and was talking about some things that he needed, and they funded that as well. So, I mean, I appreciate companies like that buying into our educational program and helping in that way. Also, Thursday, that was Friday, Thursday, I would like to say thank you to John Carr and Gary Rogers as well for partnering with the city of Tavares at the Stover Complex. They sent 3 of our guys there from the grounds department, Gary Alderman, Jerry Osteen, and David Patterson, to assist with the installation of some new sod that was there on that field, because our high school uses that field at no cost. And during the athletic, also our softball complex there, as well as high school softball uses. And they were able to help installation, like I said, of the new sod in some 10,000 square feet, which really, you think about it, that's not a lot compared to what the outfield really is. And I'm glad that we didn't do the whole outfield, but it was a good thing. Also, Scott Strong's tournament, the golf tournament, that was a success Friday. I stopped by there for a few minutes, and we had a couple staff and our attorneys that were involved, and I got to see them play a hole.
How did they do?
I'm not going to say. But I will tell you, do not pick on her. I saw you guys hit. All right. But I think this is all great. And with an audit meeting, we've been asked by Tom Mott to set up a time to go over the last audit committee's reports and things. So if you will, make sure you try to set that up. And in the meantime, we'll try to set up a workshop to discuss the policy and look at it in the future. I just caution us that be careful that we don't penalize those who are doing the right things when we look at this, because there are a lot of booster clubs out there that are doing the right things, and it's just one or two that create the havoc that make it, and they get penalized as well. So I just caution us on that. And one last thing I have, if you don't have a ticket yet for the Umatilla boosters, that they are doing their fundraiser project at the Elks Club on the 14th.
14th Veterans Day, right?
Yeah, Veterans Day.
The 11th is Veterans Day.
I thought it was the 11th.
Yeah, but the 14th is, it's on a Monday.
The 11th is a Monday.
Is it a Monday?
Yeah, I thought it
Yes.
was the 11th. That's why, because we canceled the board meeting.
They moved it to the 18th.
Okay, it's the 11th. I'm sorry, I got the wrong day. So, but they will be doing that at Elks Camp. It only costs $100. I don't have it this year, but it only costs $100. But it gets 4 people in, and you get a chance to also go for the grand prize. So, if you have the opportunity, go out and enjoy. They also provide you something to eat as well. With all that being said, we'll go on, because I'm used to dismissing now. Recess. We will have that in just a few moments. What? Just kidding. Superintendent.
I just wanted to tell everyone that Wednesday is National Custodian Appreciation Day. So please join me in thanking some custodians on Wednesday for all of their hard work. And also, I just want to say thank you to you all as a board. One of the things, there's many things that I appreciate about each of you individually, but collectively, I can say that you are always focused on what is right for kids. And I can tell you that that's not always the case. Sometimes politics and things can distract folks from their work, but you always remain committed and focused on making decisions that are in the best interest of kids. And I just want to appreciate you. It's an honor to serve with you all, and I'm very grateful.
Mr. Johnson. We're adjourned.